May now request Rotarian Swati Mayakar, Chairperson of the Public Awards Committee, to kindly introduce Ms. Prachi.
Good afternoon, everybody. Uh, like all of us always think about the social causes. We read it like a news that so and so thing happened. We are supposed to do this, but actually we don't get to do anything. Of course, our Rotary is different. Our Rotary does a lot of work, but as an individual, there are so many things which we can do, but we just think about it. And today I'm so happy that here is one very young person who saw what is happening to the environment, and she took a challenge and actually did something about it. So let's welcome Prachi Shevgaonkar. She's a media professional, communicator, and the founder of Cool the Globe. I think an apt title for her venture. It is an app and a movement for climate action. She has helped several sustainable initiatives and business craft a communication strategy. She has been mobilizing global citizens to fight climate change through technology, innovation, and grassroots action. Her journey started with a simple question: what can I do about the climate change? And from this, her journey started. And let's hear from her journey. Before that, may I request Mr. Samir Tapia to read out her citation? Samir?
Thanks. Thank you, Swati. I'd like to read the citation now for Prachi. The Rotary Club of Bombay is pleased to present its Taru Lalwani Award for Environment Protection to Prachi Shevgaonkar for founding the widely acclaimed app and movement Cool the Globe, for mobilizing global citizens to fight climate change with technology, innovation, and grassroots action, for inspiring us with her simple yet meaningful question: what can I do to climate change? May I request President Ramrose Mehta to present this to her.
Thank you, Samir. Prachi, all the very best and congratulations. This is truly well deserved.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to get this today, and all the more encouragement to me and Cool the Group team to keep going. It's a great honor.
Right. Now, may I request you now to please address our members?
Right. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. Very honored that I'm receiving this award, but I'm all the more glad because, as I told Swati ma'am when she first called me, I've been hearing about Rotary since childhood. And I always knew it as a place where people come together to make a difference. And that couldn't have been more closer to our goal with Cool the Globe. And I know I'm called as a guest speaker today, but I think I have so much more to learn from all of you than the other way around. So I hope it becomes less of a speech and more of an interaction, and I get to learn from you. I do hope you guys, give your comments, talk, or, do feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. And let's just have a conversation. So I'll just give a small presentation about my journey with Cool the Globe, and I'd like to share that journey with all of you today. So I'll just share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. So by no means is this going to be a formal presentation. I just want to tell a little bit about my journey and get comments, opinions from all of you also. So feel free to talk or interject at any point in time. Um, but how did we reach this point today where I've come here to talk in front of all of you? I couldn't have imagined this a few years back when I'm still just a simple, ordinary girl who's trying to do something while also living my life. And all of it, like Swati ma'am said in her introduction, started with just a simple question. And that's what we are going to be doing today. Uh, my journey started with two questions, and today I want all of you to ask yourselves those very two questions, and hopefully by the end of the session we'll be able to find our own answers to those questions. And the reason I say let's talk about climate change and not make it boring is because my first memories of environment and climate change are always learning about it in school, through lectures, through textbook. And every time there was a lecture about environment, I always rolled my eyes and thought, oh, not another boring lecture. And I'm sure that's what most of us think. So I think, even before we begin this 45-minute interaction, I think let's together decide to not make it boring. So in the interest of doing that, we are just going to be talking about two questions. And the first question is something that I asked myself when I entered college. And I remember Googling what is the biggest problem in the world today, and climate change popped up. And I was very surprised to hear that, because everybody around the world, all global institutions seem to be saying that climate change is a very pressing issue, is the most challenging problem in front of us today, but nobody around me was talking about it. And that was very odd to me. So I started thinking about, why should I care about climate change? So let's ask ourselves that today. I think it's a very valid question. Especially at a time when I had just entered college, I had a lot on my plate, and I'm sure all of you do too. I had friends to make, I had exams to give, I had extracurriculars, I had a plate full of things to do. And why should I care about polar ice melting in some other corner of the world is what I thought at that time. So this is a question I asked to me. And in order to find the answer to that question, the second obvious question that comes is, what is climate change? Now, I'm sure all of you know the answer to this question, but to begin a discussion about anything at all, I think it's always a good idea to start from the basics. And I would love to hear from some of you, what do you think climate change is, what it means to you? What have you read, heard about it?
Global warming
Right,
and greenery is getting reduced world
right.
over. So uh, this is the basic things we come to
Absolutely.
know. But
Right, very right. Anybody?
Glaciers are melting, the glaciers are melting,
Right,
which is
absolutely.
bringing up sea levels higher, creating differences in sea temperatures, have flooding at some places. And so,
Absolutely.
The balance of nature is completely disturbed.
Right, very right. Wow. I love this. Anybody else?
Many species will get extinguished.
Right, very right. I think it's good. Like the first part of the lecture always goes into talking about the effects of climate change, but all of you already know a lot. So that's a great start. I didn't at that point, and to my understanding of what climate change is, the most basic thing was climate change today is 1 degree Celsius. We live in a 1 degree Celsius world today, which means that the temperature, the average temperature of our world has increased by almost 1 degree Celsius than pre-industrial times. And honestly, it doesn't seem like much. But the more we keep going, that's going to keep increasing to 2 degree, to 3 degree, then to 4 degrees. And hopefully, the aim is to stop it before it becomes an irreversible problem. So essentially, what climate change is right now is that the average temperature of the world has increased by 1 degree Celsius. Um, so who are the villains in this story? Is these guys, is the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases, methane. And I want you to remember these guys, their names, because they are the people who are trapping the heat into the atmosphere, and they're increasing the temperature of the earth. And as you can see, carbon dioxide is the ringleader. He's the main guy, he's the main villain. But I think these people are being framed. I don't think they're the real villains. I think they're just pulling the trigger, but there's somebody else holding the gun. So who are the real villains in the story? It's us. So humans, in everything we do today, we build things, we grow things, we travel to places, we make things, we buy things, and in all of those we emit greenhouse gases. So these greenhouse gases in themselves are actually very crucial for our survival. Without them, we won't be here today. Without them, civilizations won't thrive and greenery won't grow. The earth would be too cold for us to even be there. But like my grandmother always says, too much of anything is very bad. So what's happened here is that we've started emitting so much carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases that the earth now has almost double the amount of carbon dioxide than it needs. As you can see, pre-industrial times, it had 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and that's how much the earth needs. And today it has almost 413. I think I just checked today, we had 416 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere today, and as the highest level of CO2 in 14 million years. So what is that leading to? And in that, a lot of your answers covered this. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more intense. Flooding, wildfires, storms, droughts. If you read a newspaper in 2021, you've seen this. Sea level rise. So people say that Mumbai might go underwater someday. Some countries like Maldives may be completely submerged. Changes in rain patterns. So one of the biggest impacts of climate change, they say, is that Indian monsoon may not be there anymore. Indian monsoon is under threat. Retreat of glaciers, ice is melting, glaciers are melting. A glacier the size of Mumbai cut off the other day, and it came in news. Loss of biodiversity, like you said. We've heard tons and tons of chapters on this loss of biodiversity. So after hearing all of this, I want to ask you, do you now care about climate change? Um, have you found the answer to the first question? Do you care about it?
Of course, we do. We have to.
Anybody else in
We
the
are
chat
not
box? You can just say yes or no. Do you think you care about this after hearing it?
Yes, I think we all do.
Yes, definitely we do. Yeah.
I think all of you are very nice and polite to say yes.
But
Um,
but we are not willing to change our lifestyle. That is the
right.
crux.
Right. So you spoke about it, like you just said it. So you're very nice to say yes, and as Mudit sir said, it goes deeper than that. So when I first heard about these impacts of climate change, I thought that it's very bad and it's terrible that what's happening. But then I had a moment of honesty with myself, and I thought, I don't really care about this that much. I think it's bad, and I want somebody to do something about this, but I don't care about it enough to make changes in my life. And it's not bad. I have limited threshold of things to do, and ice melting in some other corner of the world, sea level rising, it's not going to be one of the things that I care about. I have enough on my plate, and that's what I thought. And so then once I thought that, I don't really care about this, the second question that emerged was, then what do I care about? What do I truly care about, as ordinary people in our day-to-day lives? If we had to forget about climate change, what are the things that we care about? And that's something that I want to ask you as well. What do you care about?
Like you said, our daily living.
Right.
We are so busy with ourselves that we are just thinking about our lifestyle and our daily routine.
Right. So we care about our lifestyle, we care about our routines. What else? What else do we care about?
I'm worried about the species that will get extinguished because that's not reversible.
Right.
Once they are lost to mankind. Yeah.
Right. Yes, so you're very learned, and you're a lot ahead than us to care about species. I didn't at the time, I cared about it, but I didn't care about it enough. Um, So I asked myself, what are the things that I truly care about in my day-to-day lives? And the answers were, we as ordinary people, we care about very simple things. We care about our food, we care about our health, we care about our homes, we care about our livelihoods, our incomes, and we care about family. If time permits, we care about politics here in India. And there's just a handful of simple things that every single person cares about in their day-to-day life. And that reminds me of a quote by Stalin. And I know he was a dictator and he's often called a sadist for saying this, but there's a jarring truth behind it. He said that one death is a tragedy, but 1,000 deaths, that's just a number. So let's forget about climate change for a minute. Let's forget about these big dry words, and let's look at five individual faces behind these catastrophic impacts of climate change. Um, so I'm going to tell you about a few people that I met, and the first person I want to talk to you about is this 12-year-old boy I met when I was making a film about children in slum areas and what their dreams look like. And the day I met him, I asked him a simple question. I asked him, if you could get anything you want in the world, if you could have one wish, what would that wish be? And I'll never forget what he said. Um, he said, I wish my house didn't get filled with water every year. And that was a very jarring thing for me, because a 12-year-old boy gets to ask anything in the world, and he has to ask for something as basic as a safe shelter above his head. And I realized that he's not alone. There are 10 million people every year who are forced away from their homes due to climate change. And as weather becomes more extremes, as roughly built slums are water as water erupts more frequently into roughly built slums, as more and more people have to fly away from their homes, there'll be more and more young boys like him who have to worry about something as basic as a shelter above his head. And I realized that this I do care about. The second person I want to talk to you about today is this extremely bright young girl I met when I was working with an NGO on education. And I met her around the time there was a drought in Pune. Khadakwasla Dam had dried up and water was being used scarcely throughout the city. And when I met her, I asked her, so which standard are you in? And she said, I don't go to school these days. Why is that? I asked. It was because her house got water only for 2 hours in the afternoon, and nobody else in the home could afford to stay home at that time. So she had to skip school to stay at home to do this. And I realized that she's not alone. Climate change impacts our water. It means that less and less people get access to clean and sanitized water. It means that bright young girls like her have to stay in unstable homes, have to quit their education, stay at home so they could fill buckets with water. And I realized this I do care about. Now, the third person I want to talk to you about is one of the most inspiring young women I've ever met. And when I met her, she was around the same age as me. I was working with a community of waste workers in Bangalore, and she had come from Bangladesh. She was around the same age as me, but she was 18, but she was already married and she had a small daughter. The day I met her, I walked 5 kilometers with her to the nearest school district. We walked to the school. She sat at the doorstep of the school and demanded that her daughter be employed, be admitted into the school. But they couldn't do it because her daughter didn't know the language. She didn't know Kannada, and she didn't have the necessary documents to get admitted into the school. But this girl, she didn't give up. For the next 1 month, every morning she walked to the school. She sat on the front doorstep, and she refused to leave until they found a place for her daughter in the school. And finally, the school found a way around the technicalities, around the language barriers, and her daughter got admitted. Now, what does this have to do with climate change? let's talk about the millions of climate refugees who have to flee their homes due to weather uncertainties, weather extremes, their habitat not being livable anymore. Coastal, we hear about coastal communities eroding, we hear about sea level rise, but that means that there are millions of young girls like her who have to flee their homes, start their lives, children in hand from scratch. And this I do care about. Now, the fourth person I want to talk to you is somebody that we have all been associated with in our lives, and that's a farmer. So I spent some months with community of farmers. The name was Abhinav Farmers Club, and they were a group of farmers who did group farming initiatives together. And during my months with them, I met so many farmers, small dwelling farmers with 1 acre lands, who said that they just couldn't afford to keep doing this anymore because the weather was just not reliable. And lots of farmers were selling their lands, coming to the cities, and this is a story that we've all heard. But I remember one conversation I had with a 75-year-old man, and he taught me a lot more about climate change than any other report could ever have. He said that when a farmer like me can't afford to produce food, there are millions in India who can't afford to buy food. So climate change means that more people go hungry, and this I care about. Um, so I realized that I don't care about climate change because of these big heavy words. It's not about the reports, it's not about the statistics, it's not about the news that we read every day. I care about climate change because it impacts my food, because it impacts my home, because it affects my health, my livelihood. And lastly, I care about climate change because it affects the people that I care so deeply about. um, and as soon as learned the answer to the first question, why should I care about climate change? Only then did I start working on the second question, which was, what can I do about climate change? And before we start discussing what we can do about climate change, I think it's important to understand why now. Why should we do something now? What is the urgency? Why is it so pressing? And for that, I want you to remember two numbers. The first number is 51 billion, and the second number is zero. So 51 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions are what we globally are emitting. And we want to get to zero in the next 30 years. Why? For that, we can imagine the Earth as a bathtub and the emissions as a small tap that's going. And we emit 51 billion tons of emissions every year. And there are many reports as to what our carbon budget is, perhaps from 600 to 650 billion tons of emissions. And the reports vary, but all of them are certain that we have to do this change in the next 30 years. If we don't do it now, the climate change problem becomes something that we can't come back from. It becomes, we cannot avoid the worst effects of climate change then. And in order to do that, we have globally some goals in front of us. And most countries, most leaders know about these goals, but it's important now for ordinary people like us to also be acquainted with these goals and to imbibe these goals in our day-to-day life, which is to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and become completely carbon neutral by 2050, to reach the target of zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, there are two scenarios as to how this goal may play out. The first scenario is a sustainable development scenario, which is the blue line, which is the ideal case scenario where we want to go. We want to become carbon neutral by 2050. The second scenario in red, what do you think that is? It's called stated policy scenario. Is that the worst case scenario ahead of us? Any guesses as to what that is?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So as you can see in this graph is about what our world will look like in the next 30 years. So the scenario in blue is what we want to achieve. We want to become completely carbon neutral by 2050. So almost zero emissions by 2050. So that's called the sustainable development scenario. The second line in red is called the stated policy scenario, and it looks a lot like the worst case scenario we have in front of us. But what do you think that is? You know, what is the
That,
stated policy scenario?
that's what the governments have committed to,
I think
that
that
they
impact
will
of the government
come to
policy.
that level.
Yeah, if the government policies continue the way they are, then that is probably where we will land up.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So it looks so much like the worst case scenario, but it's actually the best case scenario that we have in front of us today. This is what will happen if the governments and leaders and countries do what they've committed to do for climate change. And as you can see, it's nearly not enough. By following this scenario, we in fact end up increasing our greenhouse gas emissions by a margin, and it's not anywhere near to where we want to go. So there's something missing in the picture. What's wrong? What are we missing? People.
The
So
individual.
if you see all the biggest transformations throughout history, they have been made not by governments, not by policymakers, not by legislators, but they've been made by people. And as ordinary people living our day-to-day lives, we often forget the power that we can hold when people come together to take action. And that is why it's so important for us to take action on climate change. Do not just talk about it, but decide to come together and do something about it. And I'm going to tell the story of my own journey of climate action. So once I realized that I wanted to do something about it, um, there was still a question of what I could do. Climate change seemed like a problem that was beyond me. What can I, an 18-year-old girl in college, do about sea level rise, loss of biodiversity? It seems like something that's very big. So I did what any girl does when she's faced with a problem. I went to my parents and I asked them, what do you think I can do about climate change today? And we decided as a family that we would reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions by 10% every year. And so we started doing that. We started doing research as to what are my activities that are leading to these greenhouse gas emissions. How can I reduce my emissions in my day-to-day life? And we started coming up with simple things. We started tracking and measuring how we could reduce this, and we started measuring our impact. And two strange things started to happen when we did that. The first strange thing was that it was fun. And this is something that I wasn't expecting. So climate change till that point had been something that was negative. I was hearing about where the world is leading, and it was just a overall very pessimistic experience. But once I started taking actions in my day-to-day life, it became such a positive, such an empowering experience for me. It almost became like a happy game that I was playing, with my family. The second strange thing that happened was so many people came to me and said that I want to do this with you. It seems like you're doing something interesting and I want to join in. And this is another thing I wasn't expecting, because we always used to hearing that people want to talk but they don't want to do. But here I was doing something, and so many people wanted to join in, and so many people wanted to take action. And that was surprising for me. So when that happened, I started looking for frameworks out there who would help ordinary people come together to do something about climate change. And to my surprise, there were none. So if we thought if there's nobody else doing it, then we must do it ourselves. And from this school the globe was born. So we saw that global institutions throughout the world, IPCC, World Bank, all of them emphasize on the importance of individual action. Our Prime Minister, when he spoke in the climate conference last month, he spoke about by making sustainability and climate action a part of our life. So everybody was talking about it, but there was no easy way to measure this. There was no easy way to quantify this. So we decided to build an app which would help individuals reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions to a target. And that's how Cool the Globe was born. Throughout my college years, we worked on building this app. We did research, coding, storyboarding. We spoke to so many people, individuals, experts, entrepreneurs, app coders, and through the efforts of many people, this app came alive around the same time that I graduated from college. And when it did come alive, we realized that our work was nearly not done. The main work was in convincing people that in the face of climate change, they could make a difference. So we decided to talk about it, and we made small videos just talking about what the app is, what it does, and what the power of climate action is. And Very surprisingly, people shared those videos with their friends, they shared with their friends, and before we knew it, millions were talking about this campaign. We got messages, emails from leaders, entrepreneurs, policymakers, um, uh, all the important people. But what touched my heart the most were the calls and messages I got from ordinary people. So a 9-year-old girl emailed me saying that I don't really have a phone yet, but I still want to do something. So here I am asking you, what can I do in my life about climate change? And she had understood a simple thing that many adults often don't, is that actions often matter a lot more than words. Then an 80-year-old woman called me up and she said, I don't get out of my house much, but I leave my lights open in the afternoon, and I'm going to stop doing that from today. And that would be my contribution to this movement. We had a person who purchased a cycle, and he said that I'm going to start going to my office on a cycle now. And in the app, I can see how many emissions I'm saving by doing that. And that's encouraging me all the more to keep on this journey. There was a person who translated all of our videos, communications in Hindi, so more and more people could understand it. And this kind of grassroots action from citizens was something that was completely unexpected, but also so hopeful and so empowering, that people today are willing to come together to do something about climate change. So essentially, I will also talk a little bit about what Cool the Globe app does and what Cool the Globe movement does. The app is essentially, as soon as you enter Cool the Globe app, to do anything at all in life, not just climate action, you need two things. You need to be able to quantify your impact, and you need to be able to set targets, set goals for yourself. So that's what we do through the app. As soon as you enter the app, everybody gets a monthly and an annual target to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions. So a person living in India, for example, will get a target of reducing 30 kg of greenhouse gas emissions this month. And then they see how they'll do it through various areas, through simple actions in their day-to-day life. So they say that three key areas that lead to climate change: one is transport, second is buildings, and third is industry. So we try to translate that to an individual. So transport for an individual means travel, the travel we do in our day-to-day life. So a person, say, goes to their office, which is 10 kilometers away, by cycle instead of a car. So they are saving 2 kg of greenhouse gas emissions. So many people are working from home these days. So by doing that, automatically we can see how many emissions we are saving. The second area is what all we do in our home. So it's summertime and it's so tempting to switch on the AC, and it's okay to do that sometimes. But if I don't use the AC for 5 hours, that means I'm saving almost 6 kg of CO2 emissions. In materials is the most impactful area, but something that not a lot of people know about. In everything we buy has an embodied energy attached to it. So suppose I don't buy 2 saris, and that would be about 1 kg in weight. That means I'm saving almost 10 kg of CO2 emissions. If I postpone the purchase of a car by 1 year, that means I'm saving 1,000 kg of CO2 emissions. And what happens is, when we see this impact that we are making by taking climate action, it encourages us all the more to keep going. But one question that we often get asked is, what can one individual do? What is one person going to do? Like, it's insignificant. But I think when there's so many individuals coming together, to do the same thing, then the collective impact can be extraordinary. And to show the power of this collective impact, we have a global meter on the homepage of this app. And it shows the savings made by all app users combined. And that is essentially Cool the Globe app, but it's a lot more than that. Um, because of the grassroots action we've seen from people, it started growing into a citizen-led movement for climate action. And essentially that's been our journey so far. It's grown into an enterprise. It's grown into small projects that we're doing, speeches we're giving, talking to people, talking to students, talking to farmers. We get so many calls every day with people talking about how climate change is impacting them, and with people asking what they can do about it. And that kind of citizen grassroots action by citizens, I think, is so powerful, and it gives us a hope to solve a problem as big as climate change. So then we come to possibly the most important part of this is what can you do about climate change. Now the first thing that I believe all of us can do is reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions by 10%. And 10% is not a lot. So we always start with something that's convenient, that's easy, and that we can do without changing our life too much. Doing something, starting somewhere is most important. So this is the first thing that everyone can do, because actions matter a lot more than words. So we must first imbibe action, climate action, in our day-to-day life. The second thing you can do now, I know that each and every one of you sitting here today, most people, when I talk to them, I have to convince them that they have the power to make a difference. But I don't have to convince that to all of you, because most people in the Rotary Club today, you're already in a position to make a difference. You've already done so much stuff to make a difference. So you're aware of your power. So the second thing you can do is support projects that are about climate change. In Cool the Globe itself, we have a few projects coming up. We are setting up an e-learning platform for climate science, which would explain what is happening and the effects of climate change to people through their day-to-day lives and through their journeys. So we have many such projects coming up, and you can always be involved by supporting those projects. The third thing you can do is lend your expertise. And so what we get is, every day we get so many calls from different kinds of people who are doing so many different things, and they find a way to support this movement through their expertise. You know, if it's a videographer, they make videos about climate change. If it's a doctor, they talk about climate change and the medical science. And no matter what you do, there'll always be a way to use your expertise to make a difference. The fourth thing, of course, for anything to grow, you need resources and funds. It's right. It's always a great way to scale up. So right now, what we have is completely organic action from citizens, from people, and the onus is now on us to scale up at the pace that this movement is growing. So by giving resources and funds to anybody who's doing anything about climate action, that's a great way to be involved. And fifth thing, we are now appointing CTG advocates and mentors. So we have a lot of young people who want to do something about climate change. We have citizens, and the more people there are, there's a great power in one person talking about this with 10 of their acquaintances. So there's a great power in becoming an advocate, and there's an even greater power in becoming a mentor, and to mentoring young people, citizens, on how they could do this while living their day-to-day life. And the sixth thing that I wanted to ask all of you today is, and that is perhaps the biggest thing, is advice from all of you, because I know that all of you have done so well in your respective fields in your career. A lot of you are entrepreneurs. A lot of you have done very successful projects. And what this movement needs the most right now is mentorship and advice from all of you. So how can we grow from this point out? How can we grow sustainably, and how can we reach our target of bringing climate action through to the common man through enterprise? Is what I want to ask from all of you. And with this, I end. end this presentation. It has been great talking to you, and now I open the floor to advice from you and to questions from you.
Thank you, Prachi. Thank you very much for that. Very, very, very interesting, scary at times as well.
Right.
But you have truly inspired us. I can say that for all of us. Let's open up the floor for questions, comments, advice, as Prachi says. I think, Mudit, you're the first one,
Yes.
as usual.
Thank you, President Fali. Congratulations, Prachi. You are mature way beyond your years, and as our president said, you have really inspired us. So, just a suggestion and your comment, and what you are doing is amazing. What you can do is what you should do rather than talk big and turkey. So, if you can add cost economics into your app, it'll help us. So, for example, if you are switching on the AC for 5 hours, you will save 100 rupees or whatever. That will motivate more people to become more climate conscious, because in our economic society, money talks loudest. Thank you.
That's a great suggestion.
Vinod Juneja, go ahead, please. Vinod, you'll have to unmute yourself. Please ask your question. While we wait for Vinod, Ravi, go ahead.
Prachi, is this climate change reversible?
No, sir, it's not. So all the emissions we put out in the atmosphere right now, we can't take it back. It stays in the atmosphere for hundreds and thousands of years, millions, in fact. So it's not a reversible problem, which is why we only have 30 years left to. So right now, even if we start doing something, it's not going to minimize what we have already done. What we take action today only to avoid the worst effects of climate change, only to avoid coming to a point from which we cannot return. But it's not, climate change is an irreversible problem, which is why it's a pressing problem.
Thank you.
Preeti, you have a question?
Prachi, this was wonderful. I felt like I'm in school, and that gives me a thought that, why should you be not taking this to schools, particularly, starting right from the young, colleges as well. And I'm sure children will be able to relate much better with you, the way you are explaining and, taking this, and I think in a long term, it's ultimately the children, because many times we see that children are actually educating their parents, and I think they should also be your target audience.
Absolutely. So we are taking lectures in schools, colleges, and we would love if you have any suggestions of schools, colleges we could go to as well. But very right, like children, yes.
Yeah, and if it is more on a something which is more better structured with the school principals, the faculty involved, in a way that the children are also getting some kind of credits for whatever they do, how they implement the climate change initiatives.
Right.
So I think that would also go in long way. These are just some thoughts.
Making it a part of the curriculum. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll just take notes of these wonderful suggestions. Yes.
Jamshed?
I have a few comments and questions also.
Yes.
As an architect, there is a lot that architects can do to reduce the carbon footprint, advocate, lead in other kinds of systems. But the question out here is that we Rotarians can be advocates by trying to push on systemic change, because that was the original question, is whether we can make a change on an individual level. We can and should, and that's when we start doing these changes and making these changes, like what you've fantastically created, the app. We start realizing that yes, we should also be involved. But what I'm trying to say is that we have people in high positions who could request for change on a systemic level, like changing the government's policies, etc.
Absolutely.
Besides this, I wanted to ask you is that recently my daughter got me to see a documentary called Seaspiracy.
Right.
And I was always under the impression that livestock was amongst, of course, besides construction and electricity, livestock was the biggest, you know, creates the highest amount of carbon footprint.
Right.
But I understand that that eating fish or being a part of the fish industry
Absolutely.
is, if I don't know if you've seen the documentary, but it seems like the sea creates the maximum amount of oxygen.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. That's very right. And so all of these, what we try to do is bring that into us. So now into our lives. So if we know that eating fish is a big part of creating climate change, we try to find out, if I eat one plate of fish, what would that lead to? So in the app, say if you eat 1 kg of fish, which would be around 2-3 plates, what one eats in a month, you save 2 kg, you emit 2 kg of emissions. So by weight, like the amount of weight you eat in fish, you emit twice that amount in carbon dioxide. And that is the impact that it makes on our day-to-day life. And the first thing you said, absolutely right, and so insightful again. The reason we push for individual action is because it creates a ripple effect for systemic change and systemic action. And that is the key point here. And when I ask for advice from all of you, this is the kind of stuff that I meant, because how can we reach out to people, and to how can we bring about systemic change now, because we have a great deal of individuals rooting for climate action. How can we utilize that to push for a systemic change?
So where do we get your app? How do we get onto your app?
Yes. So I'll just put a link to the app and also my own contact details in the chat box. And I would love to hear from all of you after this also.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Prachi. Are there any more questions? Anyone? Any comments, suggestions?
Yeah, Prachi, I would suggest you yourself join a Rotary club near your home or office, because I'll tell you why. There are 200 Rotary clubs across 36,000 countries.
Yes.
I mean, 200 countries, 36,000 clubs. And now a climate environment has become a major area of focus of the Rotary Foundation. So all Rotary clubs are want to do global grants through the Rotary Foundation. And the environment is a big aspect. So if you become part of, join these clubs, I think it would make a bigger impact.
Absolutely.
Through Rotarians.
Absolutely.
That's my suggestion to you.
Yes, I would like to join your Rotary club first.
Yeah, Neerav, don't give her a choice. She has no choice. It has to be Rotary club.
As long as she attends. As long as she attends, yeah.
Yeah, she will, I'm sure.
Yes, yes.
Prachi, I was right when I said you are going to be the youngest Rotarian. So it's a given.
Sorry, I must mention here that it was Mr. Ramesh Narayan who introduced me to Prachi. And he suggested her name. So we must all thank him also for, I had seen her videos and all, but like as usual, you see videos, but then you go over to the next video.
Right.
But he insisted that we should give an award to you. So
I'm very thankful to him. Is he here today?
No, I was checking, but he wasn't there.
Right, right.
So Swati, I'm relying on you to bring Prachi into the fold.
Yes, I will.
Yes. So let's do that. That'd be nice.
And we'll all I'll get on your app.
Yes.
And maybe we can take today's meeting as attended.
Right. My first meeting. Yes.
And you will be in Environment Committee next member.
Right. So I'm so happy that this was only the first meet, and there'll be many more after this.
It will be. Very well. Satyan, may I please call upon you to give the official vote of thanks?
With pleasure. Dear Prachi, thanks so much for your insights and inspiring ideas. In fact, I think you have given us a greater understanding about climate change, and I'm sure we are all better placed to do something about it after your presentation. And just one suggestion, I think I couldn't find the Cool the Globe app on the iOS platform. So if you can share
Yes,
that
we're
link.
launching it in the next month on iOS.
Okay,
So I'll
because while you were
definitely send
talking,
you
I
the
was
link.
trying to download, it was not possible.
Yes.
So that's a great way to reach the audience which has iPhones, because they have
iPhones.
something which to do with greenhouse emissions in India at least.
Absolutely. Yes, so we're launching on iOS in the next month. So I'll send you a link when that happens.
Great. And as a token of our appreciation for spending this afternoon with us, we will be lighting up a rural household using solar power.
Wow.
And also share the certificate with you shortly.
Amazing. Wow.